The end came not with the fury of conventional weapons, but with something far more terrible than anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Dr. Lee Minseok had spent decades perfecting the void generator's devices that did not simply destroy matter, but erased it from existence entirely as the invisible ships of the Ghost Fleet positioned themselves around Velthora. Prime the final moments of the Velthori Empire began to unfold. King Vextar stood alone in his throne room, his courtiers and guards having fled to deep underground bunkers that would prove utterly useless against what was coming. The massive holographic display showed human ships surrounding his world like white blood cells attacking a disease he had ruled an empire. Spanning dozens of star systems, commanded fleets that had crushed entire civilizations and held the power of life and death over billions of beings. Now, he was just another tyrant about to face the consequences of his choices. Your Majesty, came a weak transmission from Defense Minister Kaxnor, who was hiding somewhere in the depths of the planetary command center. The human ships are charging some kind of unknown weapon system. Energy readings are beyond anything our instruments can measure. The king laughed, but there was no humor in the sound, only bitter recognition. Unknown weapons. Of course, we thought we knew everything about warfare, didn't we? 3,000 years of conquest, and we never encountered anything we couldn't understand or defeat. The throne room around him was a monument to Velthori arrogance. Skulls of defeated alien leaders lined the walls, while weapons taken from conquered worlds decorated the ceiling. Each trophy represented a species that had once thought themselves mighty, only to be crushed beneath Velthori power. Now, the Velthori themselves were about to learn what it felt like to be on the receiving end of superior force. On the bridge of the Retribution, Admiral Park So-young watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction. The Ghost Fleet had confirmed that all major population centers had been evacuated. Most Velthori civilians had fled to the outer moons in ships and escape pods when they realized their military was no match for human technology. The void generators were charged and ready, weapons so terrible that their very existence was classified at the highest levels of human government. These devices could create expanding spheres of absolute nothingness that consumed everything they touched, leaving behind perfectly spherical holes in reality itself. Admiral Commander Kim Jae-won reported, "We are receiving a final transmission from the planetary surface." Put it through. Admiral So-young replied. King Vextar's image appeared on the main screen, but the arrogant tyrant was gone. In his place stood a broken creature who had finally understood the magnitude of his mistake. His red scales had lost their luster, and his burning eyes were dim with defeat. "I underestimated your species," he said simply, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought you were weak because you came seeking peace. I believed that diplomacy was a sign of cowardice." "I was wrong." "Yes," Admiral So-young replied, her voice carrying no satisfaction, only cold finality. "You were the king." Looked around his empty throne room, seeing it perhaps for the first time as others might see it. A chamber of horrors built from the bones of the innocent, decorated with the skulls of those who had dared to resist tyranny. "Tell me," he asked, "what happens to my people, the civilians who had no part in the decision to kill your diplomat?" "They will be relocated to suitable worlds and given the chance to build a better civilization," Admiral So-young replied. "One that understands the difference between strength and cruelty. One that does not murder diplomats who come in peace." King Vextar nodded slowly. "And the Empire, our vassal species, our conquered territories, free all of them. The age of the Velthori Empire ends today. Your former subjects will be given the chance to govern themselves, to build their own futures, without fear of your fleets returning to enslave them." Again the king closed his eyes. "I see, and this is humanity's justice. This is humanity's mercy," Admiral So-young corrected. "Our justice would have been to treat your entire species the way you treated Ambassador Lee Taemin instead. We offer your people a chance to learn from your mistakes, to become something better than what you were for." A moment King Vextar stood silent in his empty throne room, thinking about the path that had led him to this moment. 3,000 years of conquest, and what did he have to show for it? A hollow empire built on fear that had crumbled in less than an hour. "Your diplomat," he said. "Finally, he died. Well, he showed no fear, even when he knew what was coming. He knew that his death would mean something." Admiral So-young replied. "He knew that humanity would not let his murder go unanswered. He sacrificed himself to reveal the true nature of your empire, to show the galaxy what you really were. The transmission ended. Ghost Fleet Admiral So Young commanded execute the void generators activated simultaneously around every major military installation. Government complex and industrial center on Velthra Prime. The weapons did not create explosions or leave craters. They simply erased everything within their radius, leaving perfectly spherical holes where matter had once existed. The royal palace vanished, first consumed by an expanding sphere of nothingness that left behind only empty space where King Vexstar had made his final stand. Military bases disappeared next, followed by weapons factories and shipyards. Each activation of the void generators removed another piece of Velthari power from the universe within minutes. Velthra Prime was no longer a functioning world, but a hollow shell riddled with perfectly round holes. The planet's core was exposed to space through the void where the palace had been. The gravity field collapsed, and the remaining surface began breaking apart and drifting into the cosmic darkness across the galaxy. The news spread faster than light itself. The mighty Velthari Empire, which had seemed eternal and invincible, had been destroyed in less than an hour by a species most civilizations had never heard of. The message was clear and terrifying. Humanity had arrived, and they were not to be trifled with. On dozens of worlds, former Velthari subjects looked up at their skies and realized they were free for the first time in centuries. The fear that the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Velthari system like a swarm of metal predators. Admiral Park So Young stood on the bridge of the flagship Retribution, watching as her tactical display filled with thousands of friendly contacts. The combined might of humanity's military had never been deployed in a single operation before, and the sight was both beautiful and terrifying. The bridge of the Retribution was a marvel of human engineering, 500 meters long, with holographic displays that showed every detail of the battle. Space officers moved with quiet efficiency between control stations, while the soft hum of quantum computers filled the air. Everything was calm, professional, and deadly serious. Admiral, we are receiving surrender offers from 17 Velthari vessel species. Commander Kim J-1 reported from his communications station. They are requesting permission to withdraw their forces from the system. Granted. Admiral So Young replied without hesitation. Transmit safe passage corridors to all vessels displaying surrender codes. We have no quarrel with those who were forced to serve the Empire. This was typical of human warfare strategy. Separate your enemies' allies from your true targets. Give the innocent a chance to escape before unleashing destruction. The humans had learned long ago that unnecessary killing only created more enemies. The Velthari Defense Fleet was impressive by galactic standards, nearly 2,000 heavy cruisers and battleships arranged in a classic wall formation around their homeworld. Each vessel was over a kilometer long, with weapons that could level cities and armor that could withstand nuclear explosions, but they looked like toys compared to the human dreadnoughts. Each Annihilator-class ship was 3 times larger than the biggest Velthari vessel and carried enough firepower to destroy an entire battle group. The human fleet formation was a thing of mathematical beauty, with every ship positioned for maximum tactical advantage. Ghost Fleet report status. Admiral So Young commanded all stealth vessels in position. Admiral, came the reply from Captain Yang Ang. Hi Jin, aboard the invisible destroyer. Whisper, we have targeting solutions on all major population centers, military installations, and the royal palace. The Ghost Fleet was humanity's secret weapon. Ships that existed in quantum superposition, invisible to normal sensors, until they chose to reveal themselves. They had been moving through Velthari space for weeks, mapping every target and preparing for this moment. On Velthra Prime, King Vexstar watched in growing horror as the human fleet deployed with perfect precision. These were not the desperate, chaotic forces he had expected from a primitive species. Every movement was coordinated with mathematical accuracy, every ship positioned exactly where it needed to be. Open a channel to the human fleet, he ordered, his voice strained with barely controlled fear. The main display in the throne room flickered and Admiral So Young's face appeared. Her expression was calm, professional, and more frightening than any threat because it showed no emotion at all. This was not anger or hatred, this was simply a job that needed to be done. I am Admiral Park So Young of the Terran Defense Force, she said in a voice as cold as deep space. You murdered our diplomat during a peaceful mission. Surrender now, and your population will be relocated to suitable worlds. Refuse and your planet will be sterilized. King Vextar drew himself up to his full height, trying to project the authority that had cowed 1,000 species. I am Vextar, Emperor of the Velthari, Conqueror of Worlds, Master of the Eastern Spiral Arm, Destroyer of the Andromedan Fleet. Lord of you have 60 seconds, Admiral. So Young interrupted. Choose. The connection terminated before the king could finish his titles. For a moment the throne room was silent, then King Vextar's rage exploded outward like a supernova. Fire all weapons, he screamed. Destroy these insolent apes. Show them the true power of the Velthari Empire. The Velthari fleet opened fire with everything they had. 2,000 ships unleashed their full arsenals in a display of firepower that lit up the darkness of space. Energy beams that could vaporize mountains lanced across the void toward the human vessels. Missiles with planet-cracking warheads streaked toward their targets. Particle cannons that could burn through any known armor fired at maximum power. The barrage was magnificent and terrible, enough destructive force to sterilize a dozen worlds. But the human vessels did not even attempt to dodge. Their shields absorbed the attacks effortlessly. Energy discharges that could destroy cities, dissipating harmlessly against barriers that seemed to bend the laws of physics. Return fire, Admiral So Young commanded quietly. The human response was surgical and devastating. Each dreadnought fired a single shot, and each shot completely annihilated a Velthari vessel. The weapons did not create explosions or leave debris. They simply erased their targets from existence, leaving expanding spheres of superheated gas where proud warships had been moments before. Within 30 seconds, the entire Velthari defense fleet had been reduced to glowing clouds of plasma. 2,000 ships that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries destroyed in less time than it takes to boil water. The demonstration was so complete, so overwhelming, that several Velthari nobles in the throne room fainted from shock. On the bridge of the Retribution, Admiral So Young watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction. The enemy fleet was gone, but the real target still remained. The planet below held billions of Velthari civilians who bore no direct responsibility for their king's crimes, but it also held the military command structure that had ordered Ambassador Taemin's murder. Admiral, came a report from the sensor station. We are detecting massive energy buildups from planetary defense platforms. It appears they intend to continue fighting. Admiral So Young nodded. She had expected this. The Velthari were proud and had never known defeat. They would fight to the end rather than surrender. But humanity was prepared for that possibility as well. Ghost Fleet, she commanded, execute primary objectives around Velthara Prime. Invisible ships began to decloak, revealing themselves for the first time since entering the system. The Ghost Fleet numbered in the hundreds, sleek, deadly vessels that had been waiting in quantum superposition for this moment. Their weapons were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, devices that could manipulate the fundamental forces of reality on the planet. Below, King Vextar stared at his tactical displays in disbelief. 3,000 years of military dominance had ended in half a minute. His entire battle fleet destroyed without inflicting a single casualty on the enemy. It was impossible. It was unthinkable, but it was happening. Your Majesty, Defense Minister Caxnor reported from his underground bunker. The planetary shields are at full power. All defense platforms are online. We have enough firepower to destroy any invasion fleet. But even as he spoke, both the king and his minister knew they were lying to themselves. The human fleet had just demonstrated technology so advanced that Velthari weapons seemed like primitive clubs in comparison. Their shields could absorb planet-killing energies without strain. Their weapons could erase matter from existence. Admiral So Young opened a final communication channel to the planet below. Her image appeared on every screen in the Velthari capital city, allowing millions of civilians to see the face of their destroyer. This is your final warning, she said. Surrender now and live in exile on worlds of your choosing. Continue to resist and face complete annihilation. King Vextar looked around his throne room at the faces of his nobles and generals. He saw fear, terror, and the growing realization that their empire was finished. But he also saw something else, a stubborn pride that would not allow them to submit to aliens they had considered inferior. We are the Velthari, he declared. His voice echoing through the chamber, "We do not surrender to anyone." Admiral So Young nodded as if she had expected this response. Ghost Fleet execute? The end began not with explosions or fire, but with something far more terrible: void generators. Devices that did not destroy matter but erased it from existence entirely began to activate around every major city on Velthora Prime. The weapons created expanding spheres of absolute nothingness that consumed everything they touched. King Vextar reclined on his bone throne, sipping fermented blood wine from a goblet made from the skull of an Andromedan queen. The taste was sweet and metallic, and it reminded him of all his past victories. The human diplomat's body had been removed hours ago, but the king still felt warm satisfaction at how easily the negotiation had been resolved. The throne room had returned to its normal activity. Nobles were discussing trade routes and tribute payments while generals planned new conquests. The death of one alien diplomat was hardly worth continued attention. After all, the Velthori had killed thousands of such creatures over the centuries. Your Majesty, General Curving approached the throne with a data tablet in his clawed hands. Our deep space monitors are detecting unusual hyperspace disturbances along the border with human territory. It appears they are moving ships in our direction. King laughed so hard he nearly spilled his wine. Let them come. How many vessels could these primitives possibly field? A dozen ships, 100. Our battle fleets number in the tens of thousands. We have weapons that can shatter moons and shields that can deflect the energy of stars. But General Curvang looked troubled as he studied the readings. Your Majesty, the sensor data is quite unusual. The readings indicate potentially thousands of ships, but their energy signatures are unlike anything in our databases. This got the king's attention. In 3,000 years of conquest, few species had managed to field more than a few hundred ships against the Empire. Even the mighty Andromedans, who had ruled 12-star systems, had only managed to gather 800 vessels for their final desperate battle. Show me, the king commanded. Rising from his throne and walking to the massive holographic display that dominated one wall of the throne room, the display activated, showing the border regions between human and Velthori space. Thousands of hyperspace signatures were indeed moving toward Velthori territory, but something was wrong with the readings. The ships appeared to be far larger than any vessel in the Velthori database, and their energy outputs were impossible. These readings cannot be accurate, the king declared, studying the display with growing confusion. No species has the industrial capacity to build dreadnoughts of this size. Our intelligence reports indicated that humanity had barely achieved interstellar flight just 50 years ago. But even as he spoke, more contacts appeared on the display. The human fleet was not just large, it was massive, beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. Worse, entirely new contacts kept materializing from seemingly empty space, as if ships were dropping out of some form of advanced stealth technology. Defense Minister Kaxnor burst into the throne room, his scales pale with fear and his breathing labored. Your Majesty, our outer system defenses are reporting massive energy buildups throughout the human fleet. Whatever weapons they are carrying, the power levels are completely off our measurement charts. For the first time in centuries, King Vextar felt a cold touch of uncertainty creeping into his mind. The humans were not behaving like any species the Empire had encountered before. Typically newly contacted civilizations either submitted immediately upon seeing Velthori power or launched desperate, futile attacks with whatever primitive technology they possessed. These humans seemed to be approaching warfare with an entirely different philosophy. Their ships were larger than anything that should be possible. Their weapons carried more energy than small stars, and they had stealth technology that made ships invisible to Velthori sensors. Minister Kaxnor continued his report. Your Majesty, we are also detecting quantum distortions throughout their fleet formation. This suggests they possess technology that can manipulate space-time itself. The king felt his confidence beginning to waver. Space-time manipulation was theoretical technology that even the Velthori, with all their scientific advancement, had never mastered. Yet these supposedly primitive humans seemed to be using it as standard equipment. How long until they reach our system? He asked, trying to keep the worry out of his voice. At current speed, approximately 15 minutes, Your Majesty. 15 minutes to deploy a defense that had never been seriously tested. The Velthori had grown complacent during their Millennia of dominance. Relying more on fear and reputation than actual military preparedness, most species surrendered before any real fighting began, so the Empire had never needed to test its full defensive capabilities. Activate all planetary shields, the king commanded. Send the activation codes to every defense platform in the system. Launch every ship in the home fleet. I want 2,000 vessels between the humans and our world. Send a message to all vessel species, the king continued. Any that assist in this battle will be granted favorable tribute terms for the next century. Any that refuse will be exterminated after we deal with these humans. But as the orders went out, King Vextar could not shake the feeling that he had made a terrible mistake. The human diplomat had died too easily, too calmly. It was as if Ambassador Taemin had known exactly what would happen and had been prepared for it. The throne room filled with activity as noble families began evacuating to underground bunkers, and military officers coordinated the defense. General Kurvang was shouting orders to fleet commanders while Defense Minister Kaxnor worked to bring all weapon systems online. Your Majesty, came a report from the sensor station. The human fleet has just dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of our system. King Vextar looked at the main display and felt his heart skip a beat. The human fleet was not just large, it was incomprehensibly massive. Thousands of ships filled the screen, each one larger than the biggest Valkyrie dreadnought. The formation was perfect with mathematical precision that spoke of incredible coordination and discipline. But the most frightening thing was how calm and organized they appeared. There was no chaos, no desperate rushing. No signs of a species launching a hopeless attack. These humans moved like professionals, like a military force that knew exactly what it was doing and had done it many times before. The Valkyrie defense fleet launched from orbital stations around the planet. Nearly 2,000 heavy cruisers and battleships arranged themselves in the classic wall formation that had served the Empire well for millennia, but next to the human vessels they looked like children toys. Your Majesty, General Kurvang reported, we are receiving surrender offers from 17 of our vassal species. They are requesting permission to withdraw their forces from the system. The king felt a surge of rage. How dare these cowards abandon us in our hour of need? But then he looked at the tactical display again and understood their fear. The human fleet was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. We are also receiving a transmission from the human fleet, General Kurvang continued. Put it on the main screen, the king ordered. The display flickered and a human woman appeared. She was wearing a dark blue uniform with silver decorations, and her expression was calm, professional, and absolutely terrifying in its complete lack of emotion. Her eyes were like chips of ice, and when she spoke her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. I am Admiral Park So-young of the Terran Defense Force, she said simply. You murdered our diplomat during a peaceful mission. Surrender now, and your population will be relocated to suitable worlds. Refuse, and your planet will be sterilized. King Vextar drew himself up to his full 12-foot height, trying to project the authority that had cowed 1,000 species. I am Vextar, Emperor of the Valkyrie, Conqueror of worlds, Master of the Eastern Spiral Arm. You have 60 seconds, the human admiral interrupted. Choose the connection terminated. For a moment the throne room was completely silent, then King Vextar's rage exploded outward like a dying star. Fire all weapons, he roared. Destroy these insolent apes. Show them the true power of the Valkyrie Empire that has ruled this galaxy for 3,000 years. Deep beneath the Swiss Alps, in a command center carved from solid rock, Admiral Park So-young was reviewing the latest fleet deployment reports. The room was filled with dozens of screens showing the positions of human ships throughout the galaxy. Officers moved quietly between computer stations while the soft hum of quantum processors filled the air. Commander Kim Jae-won was sitting at the communications station when the priority message arrived. The quantum transmission came through with the highest security codes, and it made his blood run cold. Ambassador Lee Tae-min was dead, murdered during what should have been a peaceful diplomatic meeting. Admiral So-young, the commander called out, his voice tight with controlled anger. Priority Alpha transmission from the Valkyrie system. The admiral walked over to the communications station and read the message herself. Her face remained calm, but her eyes became as cold as space itself. The message included not just news of Taemin's death, but complete scans of the Velthory throne room, their defensive positions, and detailed analysis of their military capabilities. The command center fell silent as other officers realized what had happened. Everyone knew Ambassador Taemin personally. He had been a good man who believed in peace and diplomacy. Now he was dead, killed by aliens who thought humans were weak. Send a priority alpha message to all fleet commanders, Admiral So-young said in a voice that was steady but carried an undertone of barely controlled fury. Code 777, full mobilization of all active and reserve forces. Operation Hammer of Justice is now in effect across human space. The response was immediate and overwhelming. On Luna Base, General Choi Min-ho received the activation codes and began the process that would unleash humanity's true military might. The massive blast doors that had been sealed for decades began to open with a sound like thunder. Inside, the hidden bays were the crown jewels of human military engineering, the Annihilator-class dreadnoughts. Each ship was over 3 kilometers long and armed with weapons that could crack a moon in half. They had been built in secret over the past 50 years using technology that other species could not even imagine. General Min-ho watched as the huge ships began to power up. Their fusion reactors came online with a deep thrumming sound that could be felt through the entire base. The weapon systems activated and the air itself seemed to vibrate with barely contained energy. At the Mars shipyards, Captain Yang Haijin received her orders and smiled grimly. She commanded the Ghost Fleet, humanity's most closely guarded secret. These ships existed in a state of quantum superposition, invisible to all known detection methods until they chose to reveal themselves. The technology had been developed by the greatest minds humanity had ever produced. Scientists who understood the fundamental nature of reality itself had worked for decades to create vessels that could phase in and out of normal spacetime. The ships could travel unseen through enemy territory and strike without warning. Captain Yang watched as her invisible fleet prepared for battle. The ships were there, but not there, existing in multiple dimensions at once. Their weapons were charged with exotic matter that could tear holes in the fabric of space itself. On Europa Station, Dr. Lee Min-seok made final adjustments to the most terrible weapons humanity had ever created. The void generators were devices so destructive that their very existence was known only to the highest levels of human command. These weapons did not just destroy matter, they unraveled the fundamental forces that held atoms together. Dr. Min-seok had spent 20 years perfecting the technology that could create expanding spheres of absolute nothingness, places where matter simply ceased to exist. The weapons were based on principles that violated everything other species thought they knew about physics. The activation of Operation Hammer of Justice sent shockwaves through human space. Military bases that had been quiet for decades suddenly burst into activity. Shipyards that had been building cargo vessels switched to producing weapons of war. Soldiers who had been training in peaceful exercises suddenly found themselves preparing for actual combat. But this was not chaotic or panicked preparation. This was the smooth, efficient mobilization of a species that had spent its entire evolutionary history learning how to wage war. Humans had fought each other for millions of years, developing increasingly sophisticated ways to destroy their enemies. Now, all that experience, all that knowledge, all that terrible expertise was being focused on a single target. The Velthory Empire had made the fatal mistake of assuming that a peaceful species was a weak species. They were about to learn the difference within 30 minutes of receiving news of Taemin's death. The largest military force in human history was moving toward Velthory space. Admiral So-young stood on the bridge of the flagship Retribution, watching as hyperspace rippled around thousands of human vessels. The ship was a monument to human engineering, 5 kilometers long, with armor that could withstand the explosion of stars and weapons that could destroy entire fleets. Its bridge was a cathedral of technology with holographic displays, showing the deployment of forces across dozens of star systems. Admiral, her tactical officer, reported, all fleets report, ready for combat operations. The Ghost Fleet has achieved full stealth deployment. Planetary evacuation of border worlds is proceeding ahead of schedule. Admiral So-young nodded grimly. She had spent her entire career preparing for this moment, hoping it would never come, but now that it had arrived, she felt a cold satisfaction. The Velthari had murdered a good man who came to them in peace. They were about to discover what happened when humanity went to war. The evacuation of border worlds was proceeding with typical human efficiency. Entire populations were being moved to safe locations within hours. Transport ships that could carry millions of people were loading refugees and jumping to hyperspace. Orbital cities were being towed to new locations by massive tug ships. But this was not just evacuation, it was preparation. Human border worlds were being turned into fortress systems, automated defense platforms were being deployed, minefields were being laid, weapons that could destroy entire invasion fleets were being positioned. The humans had learned hard lessons about warfare over millennia of conflict on Earth. They understood that the only response to overwhelming aggression was overwhelming retaliation. They had tried diplomacy, and it had been answered with murder. Now they would speak in the only language the Velthari understood. Time to target. Admiral So Young asked at 57 minutes. Admiral, came the reply then. King Vextar has 57 minutes left to enjoy his empire. After that there won't be enough atoms left of his world to remember it ever existed. The human fleet continued its relentless advance toward Velthari space, carrying with it the fury of an entire species. Every ship was crewed by volunteers who had heard about Ambassador Taemin's death and wanted to avenge him. Every weapon was charged and ready. Every soldier was prepared to fight. But this was not just about revenge. This was about sending a message to the galaxy. The age of tyrants who murdered diplomats was about to end, and humanity would be the ones to end it. King Vextar felt his anger growing like fire in his chest. For 3,000 years he had ruled this empire, and every single creature that came before his throne had either begged for mercy or screamed in defiance before dying. This human was doing neither, and it made the king feel something he had not felt in centuries: confusion. King stood up from his bone throne, and his full height was terrifying. He was twice as tall as any human, and his red scales gleamed in the light from the burning torches. His claws scraped against the stone floor as he walked down the steps toward Taemin. Each step echoed through the huge throne room like thunder. You dare to threaten me? The king roared. His voice was so loud that dust fell from the ceiling, and some of the smaller nobles stepped backward in fear. You think your weak species can stand against the might of the Velthari? Empire. Taemin did not move. He stood in the same spot, holding his briefcase and looking calm. Your Majesty, I made no threats. I simply stated facts. Humanity seeks peace, but we will defend ourselves if attacked. The king's eyes burned brighter and smoke poured from his nose. No species defends against us. We are the conquerors. We are the masters of this galaxy. Your people will learn to bow, or they will learn to die. Around the throne room, the Velthari nobles were getting excited. They loved to watch their king destroy insolent aliens. It was better than any entertainment. Some of them were already placing bets on how long the human would scream before he died. General Kurvang stepped forward from the crowd of nobles. He was an old warrior with scars covering his scales and missing teeth from 100 battles. Your Majesty, perhaps we should keep this human alive long enough to learn about his species' military capabilities. King Vextar laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. Military capabilities? What could these hairless apes possibly have that would threaten us? They barely learned how to travel between stars. Our intelligence reports say they have maybe a few hundred ships at most. But even as he spoke, the king felt that strange unease again. The human diplomat was too calm, too prepared. It was as if he knew exactly what was going to happen and had planned for it. That thought made the king even angrier. Guards, the king commanded, kill this insolent creature. Let his death be a message to his entire species about what happens when you disrespect the Velthari Empire. 4 massive guards moved forward from their positions around the room. Each one was armed with energy weapons that could burn through solid steel. Their claws were extended and their eyes glowed with hunting excitement. They had killed many aliens in this throne room, and they enjoyed their work. But before they could reach him, Taemin did something unexpected. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device that was no bigger than a coin. It was silver and had a single blue button on top. He invoked Article 7 of the Galactic Diplomatic Accords. Taemin said in a clear voice that carried across the entire throne room, the murder of an accredited diplomat is an act of war against their home nation. King Vextar stopped laughing. Your laws mean nothing here, human. This is my domain, and I am the only law that matters. Your pathetic accords cannot protect you from my wrath. The guards raised their weapons, and the energy coils began to glow with deadly light, but Taemin pressed the button on his device, and it began to pulse with soft blue light. The device was a quantum communicator that could send messages instantly across any distance. It was connected directly to Earth Defense Command, and it was recording everything that happened. In the throne room, not just sound and pictures, but detailed scans of every Velthari in the room, their weapons, their technology, and their exact location. Kill him, the king shouted. The guards fired their weapons at the same time. 4 beams of energy hit Taemin in the chest and burned through his body. The human ambassador fell to the polished stone floor, and his blood began to spread across the ancient stones. His briefcase opened when it hit the ground, and papers scattered everywhere. Weak, King Vextar said as he walked over to look down at the body. Just like all the others, they come here thinking their words can save them, but in the end they all die the same way. The king kicked the briefcase, and more papers flew across the floor. He could see star charts that showed human colonies and trade routes. The papers also had information about human technology and population numbers, everything the Velthari would need to plan their conquest of human space. Send his remains back to Earth, the king ordered. Let them see what happens to those who dare to negotiate with the Velthari Empire as equals. But as the guards moved to collect the body, one of them noticed something strange. The device the human had activated was still glowing. Its blue light was pulsing faster now, and there were symbols appearing on its small screen. General Kurvang picked up the device and studied it. Your Majesty, this appears to be some kind of communication equipment. King Vextar snatched the device from his general. So what? Let his people know he is dead. It will make them more likely to surrender when our fleets arrive at their worlds. But the general looked worried. Your Majesty, the device was active during the entire encounter. It may have transmitted detailed information about our defenses, our technology, our exact location. The king crushed the device in his massive claws. Let them have their information. What good will it do them against the might of our empire? We have 10,000 ships and weapons that can destroy entire solar systems around the throne room. The nobles were cheering and congratulating their king on another successful demonstration of Velthari power. But some of the older generals looked troubled. They had conquered many species over the centuries, and they had learned to recognize when something was different. Defense Minister Kaxnor approached the throne cautiously. Your Majesty, in 3,000 years of conquest, we have never encountered a diplomat who remained so calm when facing death. Most aliens either beg for mercy or rage against their fate. This human did neither. The king waved his claws dismissively. So what? Perhaps his species is simply too stupid to understand fear. But Minister Kaxnor was not convinced. Your Majesty, what if his calmness came from knowledge? What if he knew his death would trigger some kind of response from his people? King Vextar sat back down on his bone throne. Let them respond. We have crushed 1,000 rebellion fleets. What could one primitive species possibly do to threaten the mighty Velthari Empire? As he spoke these words, the king's deep space sensors were already detecting the first signs of something unprecedented happening in human territory. Massive energy signatures were appearing throughout their star systems. Ships were moving and weapons were being charged. But King Vextar did not know this yet. He was still basking in the satisfaction of killing another insolent alien. He had no idea that in killing one human diplomat, he had just signed the death warrant for his entire civilization. The blood of Ambassador Li Taemin continued to spread across the throne room floor, mixing with the dust of ages and the bones of ancient enemies. His sacrifice would not be forgotten, and his death would soon be avenged in ways that the Velthari Empire could never imagine. The transport shuttle made a soft humming sound as it flew through the purple sky of Velthara Prime. Li Taemin looked out the small window and saw tall crystal towers that reached up toward the clouds. The buildings were shiny and beautiful, but they made him feel cold inside. He knew what kind of people lived in those towers. Li Taemin was wearing his best black suit, the one he always wore for important meetings. He was not a tall man, but he stood straight and his eyes were calm. He carried a simple brown briefcase that held all of Earth's trade proposals. Inside were papers that talked about peace and friendship between humans and the Velthary Empire the shuttle landed on a platform made of some kind of crystal that sparkled in the strange purple sunlight. Timon stepped out and felt the air on his face. It smelled different here, like metal, and something else he could not name. The gravity was a little stronger than Earth, so his steps felt heavy. Two Velthary guards were waiting for him. They were huge creatures that looked like lizards but walked on two legs. Their skin was covered in scales that changed colors like oil on water. They had long claws and teeth that were sharp enough to cut through steel. Both guards carried energy weapons that glowed with blue light. The first guard spoke in a voice that sounded like rocks grinding together. "You are the human diplomat, yes?" Taemin said, "I am Ambassador Lee Taemin from Earth. I am here to meet with King Vextar II. Guard made a sound that might have been laughter. "You will follow us, human. Do not touch anything. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not look directly at the king unless he gives you permission." Taemin nodded, even though inside he felt angry. These guards were trying to make him feel small and scared, but he had a job to do and he would do it well. He had been chosen for this mission because he could stay calm even when people were mean to him. They walked through long hallways that were lined with skulls. The skulls were from different alien species. Some were small like human heads and others were as big as cars. Each skull had a small metal plate underneath with writing that Taemin could not read, but he understood what they meant. These were the heads of leaders from worlds that had fought against the Velthary Empire. The message was clear: submit to us or die like these others did. As they walked, Taemin counted the skulls. There were hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Each one had once belonged to someone who had tried to protect their people from the Velthary. Each one had failed. The guards led him past rooms filled with strange machines and weapons. He saw Velthary soldiers training with energy swords that could cut through metal like butter. He saw warships being built in huge factories underground. Everything he saw told him the same thing. The Velthary Empire was built for war and conquest. They climbed a long staircase made of black stone. Each step had carvings of battles where the Velthary had won. Taemin saw pictures of burning cities and fleeing aliens. The stairs seemed to go on forever, and his legs started to hurt from the heavy gravity. But he did not complain or ask to rest. Finally, they reached two massive doors that were covered in gold and jewels. The doors were so big that 50 people could walk through them. Side by side, strange symbols were carved into the metal, and they seemed to glow with their own light. The doors opened by themselves without making any sound. Inside was the throne room, and it was the most frightening place Taemin had ever seen. The room was huge, bigger than a football stadium. The ceiling was so high he could barely see it. The walls were covered with more skulls and weapons from 1,000 different worlds. But the most frightening thing was the throne itself. It was made from bones, huge white bones that had been carved and fitted together. The bones came from some creature that must have been as big as a whale. The throne sat on a platform that was made from black stone and covered with red carpets that looked like dried blood, and sitting on that terrible throne was King Vextar. The king was 12 feet tall. Even while sitting down, his skin was dark red like old blood and covered with scales that were harder than steel. His eyes burned with red fire, and when he breathed, smoke came out of his nose. His claws were longer than kitchen knives and looked sharp enough to cut diamonds. On his head was a crown made from compressed diamonds that had once been entire planets. The Velthary had a machine that could crush whole worlds into jewels, and the king wore those jewels like a hat. Around the throne room stood dozens of Velthary nobles and generals. They all watched Taemin with hungry eyes like wolves looking at a sheep. Some of them were licking their lips with long forked tongues. King Vextar leaned forward on his bone throne and spoke in a voice like thunder. "So the hairless apes think they can negotiate with me." His voice echoed off the walls and made the floor shake under Taemin's feet. The nobles all laughed, and the sound was like metal being torn apart. "Tell me, little human," the king continued, "what could your pathetic species possibly offer the mighty Velthary Empire? We have conquered 1,000 worlds and destroyed 1,000,000 ships. What do you insects have that we could possibly want?" Min opened his briefcase with steady hands, even though his heart was beating fast. He pulled out a folder filled with papers and data tablets. "Your Majesty, humanity offers knowledge of advanced terraforming techniques that can turn dead worlds into gardens. We have medical innovations that could extend Velthary lifespans. By centuries, we also have access to rare minerals from our outer colonies that are not found anywhere else in this part of the galaxy. The king listened, but his expression did not change. He had heard offers like this before from dozens of species. They all came with gifts and promises, hoping to buy their freedom with technology or resources, but there was something different about this human. Most aliens who came before the throne were shaking with fear or crying or begging for mercy. This one stood straight and spoke clearly. His voice did not tremble and his hands did not shake, and what the king said, leaning forward until his burning eyes were close to Taman's face, makes you think, "I will not simply take what I want from your worlds. What makes you think I need to negotiate with insects like you?" Throne room became very quiet. Everyone was waiting to see how the human would answer. This was the moment when most aliens broke down and started begging or offering themselves as slaves, but Taman looked directly into the king's burning eyes and said, "Because, Your Majesty, we believe in the strength that comes from cooperation rather than conquest. Humanity prefers peace, but we are prepared for any alternative." The silence that followed was so complete that Taman could hear his own heartbeat. The king stared at him with growing surprise and anger. No one had ever spoken to him like this before. The other species either cowered in terror or screamed in defiance before their inevitable destruction. This human was doing neither. He was calm and confident, as if he held cards that the king could not see, and that made King Vextar very, very angry.